Today's video is sponsored by Raid Shadow Legends. I feel as though it isn't an exaggeration when I say that Chapter 9 of Two Blue Vortex is possibly the greatest chapter of Boruto we've ever received. Because in Chapter 9, Jura continued his assault on Konoha, Boruto and Kawaki came to blows for the first time since the time skip, and most importantly, out of anything, Kurama was revealed to either be reincarnated or revived. And while we already did our Chapter 9 rundown a few days ago, during that rundown it became increasingly evident that in order to fully break down this chapter in the way that it deserves, we would need to break down that breakdown into multiple videos. I mean, I didn't even mention the fact that Kashin Koji and Boruto are probably working with Orochimaru. That's how much happened in this chapter. But really, when you look at the chapter objectively, the most important things to talk about are Himawari and Kurama, and the future of their possible relationship. Because while it is now fairly clear that Himawari is the future Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails, what does that mean for her role in the story? Does it mean that she'll unlock the same godly power as her father? Would she take a larger step into the spotlight and become a co-protagonist of the story? And if Himawari is the Jinchuriki of Kurama because of her genes, then why isn't her brother? Or is Boruto a Jinchuriki of Kurama as well? Well, today we're going to attempt to answer all those questions and a whole lot more, but first guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you love the idea of me diving deep into your favorite manga and anime, go ahead and follow my other channel, The Weeb Commander, where instead of talking about Naruto and Boruto, I talk all other anime and manga. Or if you just want to hear me talk about all things anime and manga, go ahead and follow my anime podcast, Otaku's Anonymous, where me and Danny Mata break down everything that happens in anime and manga this week. It's available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Or if you want to see me live, come on down to Comic Palooza, May 24th to the 26th in Houston, Texas. I'm going to be doing signings, panels, and just hanging out in general. Before we get into all that, today we're going to talk about our favorite recurring sponsor to the page, Raid Shadow Legends. Spring in the real world means spring in Teleria, and that means it's time to celebrate in Raid Shadow Legends. And you can celebrate by playing a special spring minigame, where players can win game consoles and Amazon gift cards. And all you need to do to play is find hidden items around Mistwood, which means all you need to do today is download Raid using the link in my description or the QR code on the screen right now, head to springhunt.polarium.com and enter your Raid ID to start hunting for those missing items. And after you do all of that, you could win real-life items like gaming consoles or Amazon gift cards with a total value of $10,000, or in-game loot like legendary champions or skill tomes. This is the first time that Raid's ever given away such incredible real-life items. But that's not all. In this month, April 2024, Raid is launching the first ever Community Weeks, a 6-week-long celebration of its amazing community of players. And during these 6 weeks, if you log in 7 days, you'll get the legendary champion Chronicler Aidlin, and if you log in for 14 days, you'll get a myriad of even more exciting prizes in week 2. And if you go even beyond that, from days 14 to 35, you can get even more loot from in-game activities. So what are you guys waiting for? Download Raid today using the QR code on screen or the link in my description, and by following my link, you'll immediately get a huge starter pack with epic champion Tayril from the High Elves faction, and you'll get another starter pack after you hit level 25 that includes epic Rector Draft. And after you're done downloading the game with my link, use the code SPRINGHUNT24 to get silver and more, available to both new and existing players. So come and find me in game with the information on screen and join my clan, and we can be legends together. Just hit the link in my description, and I'll see you on the battlefield. To say that the Boruto fandom is currently reeling is an understatement. Kishimoto truly decided about 2.5 years ago to light his pen on fire and hasn't let it go since. And I, for one, am all here for it. And this shift that came to Boruto and its public perception, making everybody take it more seriously, really began, like I said, about 2.5 years ago, with the reveal of the Ishiki fight and Baryon mode, and the loss of Sasuke's 6-tome Rinnegan, and the presumed death of Kurama. In fact, it was the death of Kurama that made me want to get back into Boruto's manga and make me start this YouTube channel you're watching right now. Why, you ask? Well, because Kishimoto has multiple times said that Kurama is his favorite character in the story. No, it's not Sasuke. It's Kurama. That's why he drew Kurama into his Naruto Top 99 graphic, which was only supposed to be a drawing of the top 20, even though Kurama didn't make it into the top 20. And this is why the first ever video I made on this channel is Kurama's Not Gone. And to be stood, or I guess sat here in this full circle moment is a blessing, and it's low-key made me introspective about all we've accomplished over the course of these last almost 3 years, all of which I couldn't have done without you. So thank you so much. Outside of introspective reflection, I'm also ecstatic about the fact that Kurama is back. However, some people are less so, going so far as to say that Kurama's return shows that there's no consequences in the Boruto's universe, or going even further and saying that Kurama's return is essentially death bait. And low-key, I do kind of agree. Kurama's return is essentially just that, death bait. But I also believe that bringing Kurama back in the medium that Kishimoto has brought him back was genius. It was an absolutely brilliant way to transfer the power of Kurama from the previous generation to the next, all without doing the thing that would possibly sink Boruto's sails into the dirt, just killing Naruto. And that's what we all have to realize. There was always gonna be another Nine-Tails Jinchuriki. However, if Naruto continued to be the Nine-Tails Jinchuriki, he would continue to be one of the most important and powerful people in the universe. And at that point, it's not Boruto's story, it's Naruto's. However, people love how the Nine-Tails powers work. They love tailed beast bombs, the tails grabbing things, people being super fast, people being orange. And thus, within the confines of Naruto lore, the only possible way to get Kurama's power from the last generation to the new one was to extract Kurama from Naruto and place him in somebody else. But this would, in essence, kill Naruto. Because remember, Naruto, while he does have a ton of life force and a ton of chakra, is not a full-blooded Uzumaki like Kushina or Mito. And thus, while Naruto could maybe survive a couple days, a couple weeks, even a couple of months after having Kurama extracted from him, it would, much more than Naruto is currently facing, spell the end for both his relevance and possibly his life. But I also feel as though the animosity towards this event comes from a place of uncertainty, because there is truly now 1,000 questions to answer. And while people like me find that incredibly interesting, compelling, and fun, it makes a lot of people real uncomfortable. But in order to assuage some of that uncertainty and therefore some of the animosity, let's start by making a dent today and start this video off like we tend to start these videos off, by answering the easy questions. Except there's not really any easy questions. So we're just gonna start where I want to start, which is by addressing a question that I've already been asked multiple times. Why Himawari? And this question is really a two-pronged question, because within it lies both how did Himawari end up with Kurama and why didn't Boruto end up with Kurama? So let's address the first question first. How did Himawari end up with Kurama? Well, in order to answer that question, we need to look at the evidence that we have thus far, of which we don't have a ton, but we have enough to build a rudimentary answer. See, we've been talking about for years on this page, so I don't feel the need to go into it that deep, that both Himawari and Boruto have a set of 2 whiskers on their face. And this is as opposed to Naruto, who was born with 3 whiskers, possibly denoting the fact that, like their father, they share genetic material with Kurama, since Naruto was in gestation inside of a Jinchuriki of Kurama, Kushina, which for all intents and purposes should really be no different from how Kinkaku and Ginkaku obtained their Kurama-based powers. Because if we can believe that being inside of Kurama and consuming his flesh or his stomach lining is enough to make you a Jinchuriki of him, capable of using high-level sentient version 2 Jinchuriki cloaks, then wouldn't being formed from a mass of cells into a human baby inside the stomach of a Kurama Jinchuriki, and mind you, the stomach is where Kurama is sealed as well, infuse some of Naruto's infantile DNA and chakra with that of Kurama's. This theory makes even more sense when you consider the fact that Kurama was sealed inside of Kushina using the 8 trigram seal, which we learned in Minato's one-shot. And since we know from when Minato sealed Kurama inside of Naruto that the 8 trigram seal is specifically designed to leak out a small amount of the tailed beast chakra to the Jinchuriki so that they can use it in times of need, which was the entire line of logic behind Minato sealing Kurama inside of Naruto, as he believed that Naruto was the child of prophecy that Jiraiya had talked about, and therefore he would need Kurama's chakra. And thus Naruto, while being formed, was essentially just in a bath of Kurama's chakra. And then this child who was made in a bath of Kurama's chakra was born and became Kurama's Jinchuriki. And I have not an ounce of hesitancy in me when I say that if Naruto had not become the Jinchuriki of Kurama, he probably would have been pretty similar to Kinkaku and Ginkaku in terms of their relationship with Kurama. But since Naruto did become the Jinchuriki of Kurama, he further entwined his chakra and DNA with that of Kurama. And then he had children, who are now in essence the first children of the first tailed beast human hybrid. And thus they, like their father, were born with whiskers. However, one less to denote the generation separation between them and Kurama. But based off what we know about generation separations in Naruto, like how Boruto as a genin was only able to create 3 shadow clones while his father was able to create hundreds, this generation separation between Himawari and Boruto and Kurama made it so that neither Himawari or Boruto were ever able to manifest enough of Kurama's chakra to use it in any feasible capacity. On top of this, since tailed beast chakra tends to reconstitute in the area where it's most dense, it's entirely possible that while Naruto was around still being the Jinchuriki of the entirety of Kurama, he was inadvertently suppressing the possible awakening of his children to Kurama as a power they could tap into. But even if we assume that Himawari has become a Jinchuriki of Kurama because of her genes, because of her connection to Naruto and therefore to Kurama, this doesn't answer the question of, okay, then why hasn't Kurama awoken in Boruto, who is not only older but substantially more powerful than Himawari and therefore would be a much better vessel for Kurama? And we don't necessarily have a perfect answer to this question. However, I do have two possible theories, one based in science and one based off in-world reasoning. See, it's been made fairly obvious that Himawari and Boruto are rather different from each other genetically. And on top of this, it's also been made fairly obvious that when it came down to the genetic roll of the dice, Himawari objectively got a lot luckier than Boruto. But what do I mean by this? Well, the only real similarity between Himawari and Boruto is their whiskers and their blue eyes, which are important, and we're going to talk about them later. Other than that, Himawari looks just like her mother, while Boruto looks just like his father, with Himawari having black hair and, maybe more importantly than anything, the Byakugan, and Boruto having blonde hair and no Byakugan. And while Boruto was obviously born with a Jogan, we can't entirely say as to whether or not that was genetic or some other weird alien stuff going on. And thus, in the genetic roll of the dice, so far as we can tell, only Himawari got the family dojutsu. She unlocked at the age of 4 to knock out both Naruto and Kurama in their respective primes in one hit. And while this moment was memed to hell and back, with multiple people saying that Himawari clears the entirety of the Naruto universe, this could have, in essence, actually been foreshadowing. Because even outside of the fact that she knocked out Naruto and Kurama, this moment is wildly impressive, as she is the first Hyuga in history to be able to switch between regular eyes and the Byakugan, which was done intentionally by Kishimoto to make sure that she had blue eyes. We know this now, and once again, we'll talk about it later. And the reason that I'm diving into all of this is to essentially say that if we're assuming that the reason that Himawari inherited Kurama is because of her genes, then it would stand to reason that whoever had more of Kurama's genes and therefore more of Kurama's chakra would serve as the gathering point for the rest of his chakra on Earth. And since Himawari has already been shown to have a better genetic roll of the dice than Boruto, it's not crazy to assume that she would also have more of Kurama's genes. The second possible answer to this question is that Himawari was on Earth during the time skip when Boruto may not have been. See, if we assume that even a tiny fraction of Kurama's chakra was left after the usage of Baryon mode, then that small sliver of chakra and possibly multiple other small slivers of Kurama's chakra that were spread about the entire world came to Himawari instead of Boruto because she was closer. That is to say that because Kurama's chakra probably existed in small slivers in pockets all across the Earth, and because Naruto used Baryon mode, presumably on Earth, just on a part away from Konoha, it's safe-ish to assume that if Kurama's chakra was looking for a place to regather, it would find Himawari before it found Boruto, who could have been off in a separate dimension training in order to stay out of sight from Code. And all of this is said assuming that Boruto is in fact not the Jinchuriki of Kurama as well, as I guess feasibly he could be. After all, one of the first pieces of artwork that Kishimoto ever released in reference to Boruto showed off the new Gen Team 7 with all of their prospective new power-ups. We saw Mitsuki with his unlocked Sage mode. We saw Sarada staring at us with her Sun MS. However, in this graphic, Boruto, rather interestingly, has both the Byakugan and a KCM, which has confused a lot of people because Mitsuki got the power-up he was shown to have in this poster, and Sarada got the power-up she was shown to have in this poster, so why didn't Boruto? Because Boruto doesn't have Byakugan, and so far as we know, doesn't have Kurama, and thus I believe genuinely that this graphic was made before the plans for Himawari were hatched, and thus genuinely I believe that the Boruto that we get in this graphic is actually supposed to be representative of the Himawari we're now getting in Two Blue Vortex, as Himawari seems to be building up towards this version of Boruto more than Boruto himself. And somewhat ironically, Himawari now in Two Blue Vortex is roughly about the same age as the Boruto depicted in that poster, as Himawari is roughly 3 years younger than Boruto and the time skip was 3 years, and Boruto was depicted in this poster in his Part 1 style. On top of this, if Boruto were to become a Jinchuriki of Kurama, it would clash with his current character direction and would shift his similarities from Itachi to Naruto, which isn't what Kishimoto wants, and thus I think the chances of Boruto awakening to being the Jinchuriki of Kurama are slim to none. There's also the possibility that his karma marking is stopping him from awakening these Kurama genes. Maybe he's only able to house one incredibly powerful entity at a time. But if Himawari is gonna fulfill the role role that Boruto was originally supposed to fill, what does that mean for her story? Will she become as powerful as her father? Will she become the co-protagonist? Well, let's break it down. I was gonna go do some very bad breakdancing, but then I remembered I'm not wearing underwear and I don't want to have a speed moment. As for Himawari's perspective role in Two Blue Vortex, moving on, I believe that Chapter 1 was supposed to show us that Himawari will most definitely be taking a step forward into the light of relevancy in Two Blue Vortex. As in Chapter 1, we saw that not only had she decided to become a ninja, something that she was trying to make her mind up on in Part 1, but also that she was training with Team 10 on somewhat equal footing, people 3 years older than her, showing that over the course of the time skip, not only had she decided to become a ninja, but she had also become a pretty good one. And then on top of all of that, after this training session, she established the fact that she doesn't believe Boruto killed her father, which could either be a symptom of the fact that she wasn't affected by omnipotence, or that her perception of Kawaki was so good that before Boruto and Kawaki's positions were switched, she would never believe that Kawaki would kill her father. But regardless of what the answer is, it was established that Himawari, at the very least, would be willing to hear Boruto out, and thus her importance to the story was solidified at that moment as a potential Team Boruto sympathizer. And in fact, the hints about Himawari taking a step into the spotlight might have come even before Chapter 1 was released, because while the name Two Blue Vortex confused a fair amount of us when it was first released, as some of us possibly thought it was in reference to the Jogon and Boruto's other blue eye, however, recent revelations have made the fandom realize that the name Two Blue Vortex was supposed to be a hint at the fact that this part of Boruto would have two protagonists, the two blue-eyed Uzumakis, or the Blue Vortexes, as Uzumaki means spiral, or a vortex. So as for what Himawari's role will be in the future of Boruto, well, I believe it's fairly obvious. I believe she will become a true co-protagonist, standing side by side with her brother, possibly as early as Chapter 10, the next chapter, as Boruto is now in Konoha, looking for Himawari, who he knows Jura is looking for. And now, because Jura can't find Naruto and has no feasible way to find Naruto, his objective has switched from Naruto to Himawari, and thus Boruto's goals have switched from killing Hidari to saving Himawari. And since Boruto is currently the only person on Earth who stands a chance against the likes of Jura, him flying on scene and battling against Jura temporarily just long enough to grab Himawari and flee seems like a natural plot progression, because regardless of where Himawari goes, she's gonna be able to be tracked by Jura, and Kawaki and Delta have already shown that they won't be able to keep Jura's hands off her. And thus when it really comes down to it, the only way that Himawari doesn't get consumed by a 3-day-old alien is that she's essentially abducted by her brother, which works from a plot perspective, because people like Kawaki and those who have been influenced by omnipotence are gonna see this as Boruto abducting Himawari side by side with the Shinju without getting the full story, which will further propagate in everybody in Konoha's head that Boruto is a rogue shinobi working with the Shinju, with the only people who know that Boruto isn't abducting his former adoptive sister so that Jura can eat her being the likes of Shikamaru Ino, Sarada, Sumire, and possibly Kawaki. Tie this into the fact that Himawari's already established the fact that she trusts Boruto, and you can come to the conclusion that she would really have no reason to say no to Boruto if he swept in and saved her from Jura. And thus, as I said, I can't really see any reason for the siblings to not be reunited as soon as Chapter 10. But does this mean that Himawari is going to undergo a grueling training regimen under Boruto and Kashin Koji to possibly get as powerful as Boruto? To achieve a level of power that was only known to the likes of her father? I mean, maybe, but at the same time, let's temper our expectations a little bit. Kurama is very possibly highly weakened. And the only reason I say very possibly and not for sure is because of the Family Day light novel and subsequent anime adaptation, where Himawari and Naruto spend all day together looking for a Kurama doll, which is a cutesy plush version of Kurama. If you haven't watched this episode of the anime, do go watch it right now. It is genuinely the best Boruto episode out. It fills your heart with hope and joy, and it is also now possibly plot relevant and foreshadowing. And since Kurama was there for this excursion because Naruto was there, it is technically a possibility, albeit a slim one, that Kurama is presenting himself to Himawari in such a way as to not scare her. That is to say, give himself similarities to this Kurama plush. But more likely than not, Kurama is highly weakened, and therefore is much smaller than he usually is. Now, this is probably a good thing, because while Kurama is no longer evil, Minato's biggest concern when sealing Kurama inside of baby Naruto was that the overflow of the entirety of Kurama's chakra running into this baby might be too much for Naruto and one day could kill him. And while this was probably in reference to Minato worrying about Kurama taking over his body and killing Naruto as a Jinchuriki, Kurama is very clearly not sealed inside of Himawari, which means that the entirety of the chakra that he does have is pumping through Himawari's veins. So if Kurama was at full strength and not sealed, she would have the entirety of Kurama's chakra pumping through her very small body. And this isn't something that Naruto was able to pull off until he was 16 years old, in the beginning of the 4th Great Shinobi World War, after spending years as a high-level shinobi who had tapped into the power of Kurama incrementally. This isn't the only time that Kurama has been small, as we also saw him roughly this small at the moment of his creation, meaning that Kurama has been, at least visually, this weak before. But does this mean that Kurama will find a way to regain his strength and size? Maybe. But there really isn't a precedent for this, because prior to Baryon mode, chakra has never been destroyed. See, people are gonna say that when a Jinchuriki dies, the tailed beast chakra reconstitutes somewhere else, and thus this is a somewhat similar scenario, and therefore the entirety of Kurama's chakra should reconstitute into Himawari eventually. But that's not necessarily the case, because that's a tailed beast gathering their chakra, like picking up the pieces of a broken vase and gluing them back together. However, in order for Kurama to regain his original strength and size, he doesn't need to gather his chakra, he needs to gain chakra, which can be done through training, but it takes a while. We know it can be done through training because people like Sasuke, Naruto, and Kakashi were able to use things like Chidori and Rasengan more and more and more as the plot moved forward because they got more and more chakra. On top of this, since we know the chakra is a blend of mental and physical energies, by either getting stronger or more experienced, you're able to gain more chakra. Ideally, you do both. Now, if Kurama can't regather his chakra and is instead trying to regain his chakra, this would explain why he was laying low in Himawari, as a couple of years ago, like directly after Baryon mode, he could have been substantially weaker than he even is right now. But over the course of the last 3 years, he could have been regaining his strength to the point where now he is just strong enough to be detectable as a possible tailed beast chakra signature within a Jinchuriki, but only to those who are incredible sensors, like the reincarnation of a juvenile Ten Tails, Jura. And this would answer the question of if Himawari was truly the Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails ever since Naruto used Baryon mode, then how has no one detected Kurama inside her? Especially people like Naruto and Sasuke, some of the greatest sensor ninjas of all time. I mean, Sasuke's sensory ability is so great that he was able to sense Naruto's chakra signature from dimensions away. And the answer could be that up until this very moment in the story, Kurama's chakra signature was not strong enough to be detectable within the jumble of Himawaris, except to one person. Because in chapter 75, after Baryon mode has been used, Daemon runs out into the street when he senses Himawari walking past, identifying her as one of the only people strong enough to truly give him a good fight in Konoha. And while when this moment happened, it's shown a very bright spotlight on Himawari as a potential co-protagonist of the story and future very strong woman, the consensus that the majority of us came to is that Himawari was going to awaken the Tenseigan. But we now know that Daemon was detecting the possible beginnings of her becoming the Jinchuriki of Kurama. But this does raise a question. One, does this mean that Daemon is a better sensor than, well, anybody else in Konoha, Naruto and Sasuke included? And two, if Daemon is such a great sensor, wouldn't he have been more intrigued by the idea of Naruto than Himawari? Well, both of these questions have fairly easy answers. One, by the time that Daemon and Ada came to Konoha, Naruto had already used Baryon mode. Kurama was gone from him. And two, after Naruto used Baryon mode, he was either in the hospital or getting sealed in the Daikokuten by Kawaki. There wasn't a whole lot of time for him to be sensing chakra signatures of those around him. However, given what we now know about the Shinju and their relationship with the Ten Tails, it's a real possibility that the real thing that Daemon was interested in here was the actual intertwining of Kurama and Himawari's chakra, as Himawari could exist as a version of Jinchuriki, yet unseen outside of the circumstances of the Shinju, making Himawari in essence a Shinju of Kurama, a tailed beast with ego, and thus Daemon found her interesting because of the possibility of her strength to rival the likes of the Shinju, of which he would have known nothing about because they didn't exist. But still, the possibility of her strength would have been evident. But if we go with this line of thinking that Kurama's been biding his time regaining chakra inside of Himawari, that means that Himawari has now just hit the minimum threshold of what it takes to be considered a Jinchuriki. But she has a massive advantage so far as Jinchurikis go, as her tailed beast A, isn't sealed, and B, wants to protect her. And thus, even though the amount of chakra she has access to from Kurama is nothing compared to what her father had access to, she already has all the necessary components in place to immediately use KCM2, as the biggest hurdle for KCM2 was Kurama cooperating. And thus, the Boruto we saw in Kishimoto's drawing could actually be a reflection of Himawari's possible character developments in Two Blue Vortex. On top of this, if we continue with this line of logic, assuming that Himawari isn't consumed consumed by a 3-day-old alien, and Kurama will continue down his path of regaining his strength, and there's really no reason from a narrative perspective that Kurama wouldn't continue to get stronger. That Himawari in time will be able to reach for heights that only Naruto was ever able to reach for, except instead of Sage Mode, she'll have Byakugan. And she will become, in essence, the extension of the Byakugan's power we've been crying for years. On top of this, with Kurama as a battery, she'll be able to maintain the incredibly chakra-draining Byakugan longer than anybody else in Hyuga history, making her a possible KCM2 wielder with sensory abilities greater than that of her father. And this separation is crucial for her not becoming a hollow copy of Naruto. And with that, that's all of the most important questions revolving around Himawari's possible future as a Jinchuriki answered in the best way that I can. But if you guys have any additional questions about Himawari's future or her possible powers, please ask me in the comments below. And while you're down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. As it was written! As it was written!